The divers are expected to get into the water today, Vlad. Brian Hooker was held for questioning here in the Bahamas, but ultimately released. He denies any wrongdoing and has not been charged with a crime.
All right, Christiane, thank you very much.
Aren't we so glad that this story's continuing? Remember, when it first happened, he was going to stay on the island until she was found.
Right.
Her daughter said something is very fishy. She was very suspicious from the very beginning.
And his stories kept changing.
And his stories kept changing.
Right.
Even his friends were like,
Yeah, something's up.
Really glad that this is continuing.
They're going to be diving looking for her.
It is Easter Sunday. The sky above the Bahamas is still dark, and on a rocky beach in Marsh Harbor, a man has just stumbled ashore. Soaking wet and completely exhausted, he wandered onto the property of the Marsh Harbor boatyards in the early hours, talking about a key and a woman. He says she went into the water around 7 the prior evening. It is now 4 in the morning. 8 hours have passed. He tells the security guard he fired 2 flares into the dark. Passing boats saw them. Nobody stopped. That is the story he tells. But somewhere beneath those same dark waters, something else is sinking. And inside one of that man's electronic devices, a GPS tracker has been recording every coordinate, every speed, and every movement. The full digital record of a night he believed would vanish with the tide. It did not vanish. Welcome to Fatal Secrets. What you are about to hear is not a theory. It is a GPS trail that federal investigators say directly contradicts everything that man told them. One missing woman. A federal criminal investigation closing in on the truth. Stay with us. Every second of what follows matters. Her name was Lynette Hooker. She was 55 years old, born in 1970, and she came from Onsted, Michigan, a quiet village in Lenawee County, about 72 miles southwest of Detroit, where the closest major body of water is Lake Erie, roughly an hour's drive away. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, would later describe a daughter who had spent her entire life near lakes, on boats, sailing and swimming. The water was never a pastime for Lynette. It was where she felt most at home. She had been married once before, to a man named Rick Aylesworth. That marriage lasted 5 years, and in 1997 she gave birth to a daughter she named Carly. In 2000, she married Brian Hooker. They settled in a brick bungalow in Onsted and spent years building what looked, from the outside, like a solid life. Carly Aylesworth grew up with Brian as her stepfather, but she was never his biological child. That distinction would matter enormously when her mother disappeared. For over a decade, Lynette and Brian sailed together, eventually trading up from a small 2-person boat to a 50-foot vessel they named the Soulmate. They documented their entire journey publicly on their YouTube channel, The Sailing Hookers. 4 years into a voyage that had started in Rockport, Texas in 2023, and worked its way through Florida and into the Bahamas. To anyone watching their videos, it looked like freedom. What it looked like behind closed doors was another matter entirely. In January 2024, Lynette sent private messages to her friend and fellow boater Marnie Stevenson, a woman she had met in late 2023 during a sailing stopover near Bradenton, Florida. Those messages, later obtained exclusively by CBS News, told a very different story from the one on screen. We were married 21 years. Our marriage lasted 6 weeks cruising, Lynette wrote. She had left Brian and gone to stay with her mother in Florida. When Marnie asked whether she might go back, Lynette was clear. I guess it was too much closeness. We decided to call it quits. I'm not going back. In another message she added, it was real bad. I can't be out there with him. 1 month later, she was back with Brian. When Marnie checked in and noted things seemed to be improving, Lynette replied with heart emojis and a thumbs up. The private messages were not the only documented evidence of trouble in the marriage. Court records obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request by local television station WTOL confirmed that in 2015 Lynette reported to Kentwood police that Brian had choked her. He was never charged for that incident. That same year, the couple accused each other of assault. Lynette was arrested and spent the night in county jail. A warrant was ultimately denied because police could not determine who had started the confrontation. Separately, a Kent County jury had acquitted Brian of a child abuse charge in 2006, following allegations that he had choked a child during a homeschooling dispute at his home. Darlene Hamlet told investigators that Brian had physically and emotionally abused her daughter throughout their marriage, and that the couple had separated multiple times, most recently just a year and a half before Lynette disappeared. Carly Aylesworth stated publicly that Brian had made specific threats toward her mother years earlier that mirrored the exact circumstances of how she would later vanish. He has not been charged with any crime. His attorney has consistently maintained his innocence from the first day of the investigation to the last public statement on record. What the verified facts leave behind is a portrait of a woman who knew what she was going back to and went back anyway. She had quit her career, sold her house, and given away everything she owned for this life. She had put it all in, and when it collapsed, she had gone home, caught her breath, and returned. 14 months after she sent Marnie that thumbs up, she and Brian were photographed paddleboarding together in Marsh Harbor, smiling for the camera. The same waters where investigators would soon be searching for her body. The evening of April 3rd was quiet at the Abaco Inn in Hope Town. The bartender on duty was a 38-year-old local man named Ken. He served the couple that evening, rum and cokes by the pool. Or rather, he served Brian. In the 2.5 hours the hookers were there, Ken never once saw Lynette. Only Brian came to the bar, thanked him for the quick service given how crowded the place was, collected both drinks, and carried them away. At the time, Ken thought nothing of it. The following day, when the news reached him, he thought of little else. What stayed with Ken most was the geography. He knew these waters. He knew the short distance between the Abaco Inn and the spot where the Soulmate sat anchored near Elbow Cay. When he heard that Brian had claimed to paddle for 8 hours through the dark to reach shore, Ken told the New York Post directly. That timeline was extremely hard to believe. The crossing simply did not support it. The following evening, April 4th, sunset came at 7:26. 4 minutes later, Brian and Lynette stepped into an 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy and left Hope Town, headed toward the Soulmate. A routine crossing by any sailing standard, except the conditions were not routine. Winds ran between 18 and 22 knots. There was no moon. The darkness over the Sea of Abaco that night was complete. Richard Cook, fire team lead for Hope Town Volunteer Fire and Rescue, described it without softening. Nighttime, very windy, no moon out yet, pitch dark, and very rough conditions for the small boat they were in. He called what happened that night a lot of bad decisions. Cook was not speculating. He works those waters. He has pulled people out of them. According to the account Brian gave Bahamian authorities, Lynette fell overboard during that crossing. The engine safety lanyard, a cord designed to cut the motor the moment the operator leaves the boat, was attached to her, and when she went in, the engine died. Brian said he last saw her swimming toward shore. He threw a flotation device into the dark. He lost sight of her. With no engine and no moon, he paddled for over 8 hours, arriving at Marsh Harbor Boat Yard at approximately 4 a.m. on April 5th, Easter Sunday, wet, exhausted, and alone. By morning, the search had launched. The Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, Hope Town Volunteer Fire and Rescue, and U.S. Coast Guard aerial assets all deployed across the Sea of Abaco. They searched. They found nothing. Lynette Hooker went into the water at approximately 7:30 in the evening on April 4th. Brian did not report her missing until 4 in the morning on April 5th, more than 8 hours later. That delay alone was enough to raise questions. But it was not the only gap in the timeline that people close to this case noticed. Blaine Stevenson, a fellow boater, a friend of the Hookers, and the husband of Marnie Stevenson, the woman Lynette had confided in about the marriage, told Fox News Digital that after spending a few hours assisting with the initial search on the morning of April 5th, Brian returned to the Soulmate and stayed there. According to Blaine, Brian remained on that boat for approximately 24 hours after Lynette vanished before meaningfully reaching out to anyone. Blaine said publicly that he was shocked Brian did not make more of an effort to find his wife. What made Blaine's account more significant than a grieving friend's concern was what he had been doing in the days before he spoke publicly. He had been recording his phone calls with Brian, not out of immediate suspicion, but because Brian's version of what happened kept shifting with every conversation. Details moved. The sequence changed. Blaine told News Nation his exact reasoning. Brian was all over the place in the recordings, and Blaine was getting confused, and that was why he started recording. He later released one of those recordings publicly, in hopes of aiding the search for Lynette. The call Carly Aylesworth received came on Sunday evening, somewhere between 8 and 8:30. Brian delivered the news the way someone reads from a prepared statement. Matter of fact, her mother was missing, had been missing since the night before. He did not know where she was. He said they would come see her soon. Then, before Carly had processed a single word of it, he kept talking, and then abruptly ended the call. Carly told CNN it felt like he had dropped a bomb on her and hung up. She told NBC News his tone was monotone and relaxed. She told the Today show she was in shock, not just at the news, but at how it was delivered. Her public response was direct. She told reporters she felt this was probably pre-planned, that it did not seem like just some accident. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, confirmed she had not heard from Brian once since her daughter disappeared. Not a single call. Not one message. And then there was the boat's own data. Fox News Digital obtained tracking information showing the Soulmate's AIS system, the automatic identification system that continuously broadcasts a vessel's position, went completely dark for 11 hours on the night Lynette disappeared. A maritime expert told Fox News that when a system goes off and then comes back on hours later, that is not a malfunction. That is an action. Someone turned it off. Someone turned it back on. Combined with the short distance between Hopetown and the Soulmate's anchor point and Richard Cook's first-hand description of those conditions, the 8-hour drift claim was becoming harder to defend with every new detail that surfaced. The story Brian told was the only story there was. But it was a story that kept changing. And the people closest to this case, the friend who started recording the calls, the daughter who described a bomb being dropped, the mother waiting by a phone that never rang, and a tracking system that went silent for 11 hours in the dark, were all arriving, separately and quietly, at the same question. For days after Lynette disappeared, on the evening of April 8th, Bahamian authorities moved. Brian Hooker was taken into custody at Marsh Harbor and transported to the Central Police Station in Grand Bahama for questioning. His Bahamian attorney, Terrell Butler, confirmed the arrest and released a statement the same day. Brian categorically and unequivocally denied any wrongdoing. Butler described her client as heartbroken and cooperating fully. She said he had been working with authorities from the beginning and would continue to do so. Over the following days, Brian was questioned repeatedly. On April 10th, investigators grilled him for more than 3 hours, asking specifically about his relationship with Lynette and whether he had caused her harm. Language Butler herself acknowledged suggested authorities were exploring a charge tied to Lynette's death. Brian denied everything. On the night of his arrest, he had also fallen overboard while being escorted by police boat to the Soulmate for a search, sustaining a knee injury and a laceration. His attorney described the incident as the result of choppy and dangerous sea conditions. He had been holding clothing in his restricted hands and lost his footing. It was noted, with a certain quiet irony by observers, that the man at the center of a case involving a person who fell into the sea had now fallen into the sea twice. On April 13th, 5 days after he was taken in, Brian walked out of the Central Police Station without a charge. Butler told reporters the decision was simple. They had no evidence and had no choice but to release him. The Department of Public Prosecutions had recommended against charging him pending further investigation. Brian did not speak to reporters as he left. Royal Bahamas Police Commissioner Shanta Knowles made the position of her agency clear. Release was not exoneration. Brian Hooker remained an active suspect in an ongoing investigation. The following day, April 14th, Brian told ABC News his sole focus was finding his wife, and that he planned to stay in the Bahamas no matter how likely or unlikely that was. Hours later, he boarded a commercial flight and left. His Bahamian attorney said he had gone to the United States to be with his terminally ill mother. His U.S.-based attorney declined all comment. His precise whereabouts became unknown. What Brian did not know, or perhaps did know, and was moving to address, was that the Soulmate was already being watched. The Coast Guard Investigative Service had taken over as the lead U.S. federal agency. This was no longer a missing persons case. When the Soulmate departed Marsh Harbor and headed toward U.S. waters, Kais was ready. In a coordinated surveillance and interdiction operation involving surface vessels and aviation assets from Sector Miami and Air Station Miami, agents intercepted the Soulmate approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida. The vessel lost engine power during the seizure and was taken under tow by the Coast Guard cutter Winslow Greaser, then transferred to a crew from Station Fort Pierce for transit through the inlet. The Soulmate arrived at Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station with crime scene tape across the deck. Teams were seen removing box after box of bagged evidence. A Bahamian search warrant, reviewed by CBS News, had already authorized the earlier seizure of a digital video recorder, digital tablets, and cell phone equipment, items the warrant described as material evidence related to a missing person and possible bodily harm. All of it was transferred to the FBI for processing at the agency's forensic facility in Quantico, Virginia. Kai simultaneously conducted active witness interviews and released images of a second sailboat that had been moored near the Soulmate at Aunt Pat's Bay on the night Lynette disappeared, asking the public to help identify the occupants. Nobody had come forward yet. Brian Hooker had not been charged. He remained a suspect. His boat was in federal custody. His phone and devices were at Quantico, and no one knew exactly where he was. Every story has a version the teller controls, and a version the evidence tells on its own. Brian Hooker had told his version repeatedly, to Bahamian authorities, to the media, to friends on recorded phone calls. He had even mapped it out. Digital maps, sent to people he knew, showing the route he said the dinghy had taken that night and the location where he claimed Lynette went overboard. He had given investigators a geography to work from. And for weeks, that geography had shaped the entire search. Every boat deployed. Every aerial pass. Every volunteer who went out into those waters. All of it directed by the map Brian provided. All of it, investigators would later determine, pointed at the wrong place. The problem was that Brian's phone had been recording something else entirely. GPS data extracted from one of Brian's electronic devices showed a track of movements that did not align with what he had told investigators. The data was specific. It came from a marine navigation app running on Brian's phone, active and recording on the night of April 4th, while the couple was on the dinghy. A U.S. official confirmed to Fox News Digital that the dinghy had allegedly visited the same area the data identified. What the data showed was not a vessel drifting without power through 8 hours of darkness. It showed the device moving deliberately out onto the water, stopping at a specific location in the Sea of Abaco, and then returning to shore. Stopping. Not drifting. Stopping, and then coming back. Brian's account had told investigators that Lynette fell overboard near Elbow Cay, that the engine died, and that he had no control over where the current took him. His digital maps had given that account a shape and a location. But a U.S. official told NBC News directly that Brian's version had caused search teams to look in the wrong area of the Sea of Abaco from the very beginning. The independent forensic data from his own phone pointed somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that had never been searched, somewhere the original rescue operation had never reached, somewhere that only Brian's phone knew about. The new coordinates pointed to a section of the Sea of Abaco where the water reaches approximately 25 feet in depth. A source in the Bahamas confirmed that detail to Fox News Digital. 25 feet. Still. Dark. The kind of depth where something weighted does not move on its own. The kind of depth where things stay exactly where they are placed, undisturbed by tide or current or the passage of time, invisible from the surface, unknown to anyone who had not been there to put them there. Because the search would take place in Bahamian territorial waters, U.S. authorities could not simply dispatch dive teams. They had to ask. A formal request was made to the Bahamian government to grant American investigators access to those specific coordinates, the ones Brian's own phone had recorded on the night his wife disappeared, in water that nobody had yet searched. The Bahamas was considering that request. The evidence had stopped drifting. It had found a location, and it was waiting. When federal agents completed their examination of the Soulmate at the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, they were not only looking for what was there. They were looking for what was not. The Soulmate was a 46-foot sailing vessel and the Hooker's full-time home. It carried the accumulated inventory of 2 people who had been living aboard for years. Tools, equipment, provisions, personal effects, the full material weight of a life built at sea. Investigators knew what a boat like this should contain. They had documentation, photographs from the YouTube channel, witness accounts from people who had been aboard. And when they laid all of that against what they actually found, certain things were absent and unaccounted for. The couple had been avid scuba divers throughout their voyage, documented repeatedly on their own social media. Refilling tanks between islands, exploring reefs, moving through the water with comfort and familiarity. CNN confirmed the footage. The couple moving between islands, refilling scuba tanks, navigating narrow channels. The Soulmate carried the full apparatus of 2 experienced underwater swimmers. Investigators cataloging the vessel's contents paid particular attention to the diving equipment. Scuba tanks, dive weights, dumbbells, items that had been visible and documented in prior footage of the boat. Diving weights are not incidental items. They are engineered with a single specific purpose, to keep a diver, or anything attached to them, submerged at depth. They do not drift. They do not surface. They hold position at the bottom for as long as they are left there. What was confirmed missing from that inventory has not been publicly detailed by investigators. What investigators were looking for, and why, was becoming increasingly clear in the context of GPS coordinates pointing to 25-foot deep water that no one had yet searched. The Soulmate also carried a thermal infrared camera valued at approximately $33,000. A friend of the Hookers named Daniel Danforth told News Nation that this camera could have been used to search for Lynette in the dark water the night she disappeared. Brian had not used it. Danforth said he informed the Coast Guard about the camera in early May. Investigators told him they were glad to hear about it. It was the first they had been made aware of its existence. The camera was now being processed as evidence, CBS News confirmed, as part of the ongoing probe into what happened on the night of April 4th. By the time the Soulmate arrived in Florida, the full cast of this case had taken shape around the same absent center. Lynette Ruth Hooker, 55, from Onstead, Michigan, the missing woman, still not found. Brian Hooker, 58, her husband of 25 years, the sole witness, somewhere in the United States, location unknown, not charged. Carly Aylesworth, 28, Lynette's daughter and Brian's stepdaughter, who had provided a DNA mouth swab to the Coast Guard, flown to the Bahamas to search, and sat on the deck of the Soulmate talking to her mother as though she were still there. Darlene Hamlet, Lynette's mother, who had also provided DNA, who had not received a single update from law enforcement, and who had not spoken to Brian once since her daughter vanished. Terrell Butler, Brian's Bahamian attorney, consistently maintaining her client's innocence from the first day of his arrest. Blaine and Marnie Stevenson. Marnie, the one Lynette had trusted with her most private fears about the marriage, Blaine, the one recording the calls because the story kept changing. Richard Cook, the fire team lead from Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue, who had never softened his assessment of the decisions made that night. Ken, the bartender at the Abaco Inn, who served those drinks and never once saw Lynette collect them. Commissioner Shanta Knowles of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, who had confirmed release was not exoneration. Kais, the lead federal agency, whose agents had seized the boat, extracted the GPS data, and as of June 2, 2026, had divers on the ground in the Bahamas ready to enter the water. And the FBI at Quantico, working through every device, every drive, every digital record recovered from the Soulmate and from Brian's own phone. Every one of them orbiting the same absent center. Lynette, still missing, still not found. There is a specific point in a missing persons investigation when the request for DNA changes everything. It is not routine. It is not precautionary. When investigators ask a family to provide mouth swabs, they are telling that family, without saying it directly, that they believe they are going to find something. They believe they know where to look. And they want to be ready to make a positive identification the moment their diverse surface with it. The Coast Guard formally requested DNA samples from Lynette Hooker's relatives. Carly Aylesworth confirmed to CNN that she and Lynette's parents provided mouth swab samples. Carly had already flown to the Bahamas. She had already sat on the deck of the Soulmate and talked to her mother as though she were still there. She had already given 2 full hours of her time to Coast Guard investigators at the Detroit sector, her attorney Ron Marienfeld confirming that interview to CNN. Now she gave them something more permanent, the biological key that would allow a positive identification the moment it became necessary. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, who had not spoken to Brian once since her daughter vanished and had not received a single update from law enforcement, gave her DNA too. A mother doing the last thing available to her from a distance. The dive authorization came through. The Royal Bahamas Police Force formally granted the Coast Guard permission to search an area of the Sea of Abaco surrounding Elbow Cay, the exact island Brian had told authorities they were sailing toward on the night Lynette disappeared. On the evening of June 2, 2026, U.S. Coast Guard divers landed in the Bahamas to begin their renewed search. It was not yet clear exactly when they would enter the water. Thunderstorms were moving through the area Tuesday afternoon into Wednesday night, and the weather had the potential to delay the dive. The search would be conducted at coordinates identified by the GPS forensic data from Brian's own phone. Previously unsearched waters approximately 25 feet deep. 2 months of silence sitting at the bottom, waiting. Before any of that was set in motion, on Mother's Day, Carly had posted a video. She said it was her first Mother's Day without her mother. She had noticed the Soulmate being moved from its Bahamian dock by 2 men she had never seen before, neither of them Brian. She said they had turned off the GPS, so no foreign land could track the vessel. The boat appeared to be heading toward Florida and up the East Coast. She said she had not been contacted by the Coast Guard when she recorded it. She said it was pretty hard knowing her mother was no longer a text away. Hours after Carly posted that video, CBS News confirmed the Coast Guard had seized the vessel. The boat Lynette had called home for 4 years was now evidence in a federal criminal investigation. Not since the 2005 disappearance of 18-year-old Natalie Holloway in Aruba had an international missing persons case generated this scale of attention, not only across the viral world of true crime podcasters and social media, but in mainstream network outlets carrying developments on the evening news. The parallel was not lost on anyone who remembered how that case unfolded. A foreign island. A suspect never charged. A body never recovered. A family that waited years for answers that arrived too late to change anything. As of June 2nd, 2026, the day those diverse landed, the facts were these. Brian Hooker had not been charged with any crime. He remained an active suspect. His precise whereabouts were unknown. Lynette Hooker had not been found. Her daughter had given her DNA. Her mother had given her DNA. And somewhere in the Sea of Abaco, at coordinates Brian's own phone recorded on the night she disappeared, in water 25 feet deep and utterly still, U.S. divers were preparing to go in. The ocean had kept its silence for 2 months. It was about to be asked directly and with precision to give something back. Every case, at a certain point, reduces itself to its pillars. The things that cannot be explained away. The things that hold weight regardless of what anyone says about them. In this case, there are 3. The first is the GPS data, a marine navigation app running on Brian Hooker's phone, recording every movement of that dinghy on the night of April 4th, showing a vessel that traveled deliberately out onto the Sea of Abaco, stopped at a specific location, and returned to shore. Not drifting, not at the mercy of wind and tide, moving with purpose to a place and back. That data sits in direct contradiction to every account Brian gave, to Bahamian authorities, to the media, to the friends whose phone calls he did not know were being recorded. It sent the original search to the wrong location entirely. It has now sent divers to the right one. The second pillar is the missing inventory. A 46-foot vessel that was the full-time home of 2 experienced sailors and divers, carrying years of documented equipment visible in their own social media footage. Scuba tanks, dive weights, and a $33,000 thermal infrared camera that Brian never used the night his wife disappeared. A camera that friend Daniel Danforth confirmed to News Nation could have illuminated the dark water and potentially found Lynette within hours. Federal agents examining the Soulmate at Fort Lauderdale, where the vessel was moved after Fort Pierce because authorities lacked the capability to pull it from the water there, cataloged what was present and what could not be accounted for. Once pulled from the water, the boat will be taken to a warehouse for an evidence team to conduct a full forensic search. Diving weights do not disappear on their own. They are engineered to hold things down. Their absence speaks in a language that requires no translation. The third pillar is the DNA. Carly Aylesworth's mouth swab. Darlene Hamlet's mouth swab. 2 women who loved Lynette Hooker, providing the biological record that will allow investigators to say with certainty, the moment it becomes necessary, this is her. Investigators do not collect DNA from grieving families as a precaution. They collect it because they intend to use it, because they believe they are close, because the coordinates are already identified and the divers are already in the water. What remains unresolved is everything that follows from those 3 pillars. No body has been recovered. No charges have been filed. The dive results are pending. Brian Hooker's precise location is unknown. His attorneys have declined all comment. The Sea of Abaco has not yet returned what investigators believe it is holding at approximately 25 feet of depth. Coordinates identified by Brian's own phone on the night Lynette disappeared. Waters that the original search never reached because it was built entirely on Brian's version of events. The unanswered question, the one Carly Aylesworth wakes up with every morning, that Darlene Hamlet carries every hour of every day, is not a dramatic one. It is a real one. What will the divers find at those coordinates? That question has an answer waiting at the bottom of the Sea of Abaco. And when it surfaces, it will change everything that comes after it. This chapter does not end on coordinates or dive teams or federal agencies. It ends on Lynette. Lynette Ruth Hooker was 55 years old. She was from Onstead, Michigan, a quiet corner of Lenawee County where the nearest major body of water is Lake Erie, an hour away. She had grown up near water, lived near water, and eventually given up everything. Her career, her house, every possession she owned, to live on it full time. She was an experienced sailor, a strong swimmer, a woman her daughter Carly described as an adventurous spirit who called the ocean her happy place. She had been photographed paddleboarding in these same Bahamian waters, smiling into the camera with the easy confidence of a woman completely at home in her element. She gave up everything for a life she believed in. She deserved to live it. She deserved to come home. She deserved answers. Lynette's family is watching. And so is the world. Fatal Secrets will be the first place this breaks when it does. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell. We will be here.